one of the founders of Punchbowl News. I hope you are enjoying the Punchbowl News HQ during CBC ALC. We've had a lot of impactful conversations. We had Mr. Meeks earlier today talking about digital inclusion and financial equity. We've had community time, we've had lunch. We are now going to shift gears a little bit to the focus of our ambassadors roundtable. Punchbowl News started about 3.5 years ago, and one of the biggest differentiators we talk about is the fact that we want to build a community of people, not just readers, but people who are engaging, interacting, who are giving us feedback, who are really as involved with Punchbowl News as we are. And I'm proud to say that we have our second ambassadors class that has been joining us throughout the day, taking photos, talking to folks, bringing some of their community as well. And now I'm going to hand it off to Rachel Schindler, who is VP of Product and one of our co-founders of Punchbowl News, to bring a few of our 2024 ambassadors to the stage to have a conversation. Rachel.
Okay, we're all going to get on stage together. One big family here. Awesome. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rachel Schindler. I'm one of our co-founders at Punchbowl News, and I am so excited to be on stage today with 4 of our ambassadors. 2 are our ambassadors from last year, our inaugural class, and then 2 of them are our ambassador class of 2024. So joining me today on stage, to my right, I have Pamela Alexander, the Managing Director and Head of Corporate Citizenship at KKR. We have Emily Hawkins, who is the founder of the Black Tech Collective. We have Crystal Carson, who is Communications Director to First Lady Michelle Obama at the Office of Michelle and Barack Obama. And then finally, we have Vincent Evans, who's definitely having a busy week, who is the Executive Director of the CBC. Thank you to the 4 of you for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
So we're going to get right into it, and I really kind of want to start the conversation with a focus on the vision of CBCF this year. And that vision is from vision to victory. The 4 of you have risen to very impressive levels in your careers across sectors and across industries. And so I want to start with a little bit of a look back and a reflection on kind of how you got to where you are today. So I'm going to start with you, Vincent. When you think back, how has your career, the work that you're doing, the job that you do kind of day in, day out, how has it in any way sort of veered from the initial vision you had for yourself versus where you've kind of gotten to today?
It's all lined up well. Exactly how I planned it. I went to undergraduate school at Florida A&M, got involved in politics, knew I wanted to live in the state capitol, worked for my hometown congressman. Years later, after 3 chances, he got elected to Congress 7 years ago, which brought me to Washington. And since then, it has been an incredible experience, right? I used to dream, there was only one job in D.C. when I got here that I said I could do one day. I was like, I want to one day be the executive director of the Congressional Black Caucus. And 3 years ago, the chair at the time, Joyce Beatty of Ohio, called me. I was on the senior staff of Vice President Harris at the time. We were making history every day. I did not have a desire to leave the White House, but I remember that young man who said, one day I wanted to come back and do this job. So it came to fruition. So, you get into this business believing that service is the rent we pay. It is certainly what I have been, it is what has guided and been my sort of North Star. So far, so good.
Right, great to hear. Crystal, you can likely relate to the executive branch, influence and involvement. What about you? How did you think about kind of where your career would be versus where you are today, comms director for First Lady Michelle Obama?
Well, first of all, I never thought I would be on this stage next to this impressive gentleman here, all these impressive panelists. I didn't really think of myself as being in politics at all, to be honest with you. I didn't see myself. I grew up in Anchorage, Alaska, and politics wasn't something that we talked about around the table. I wanted to help people. I knew that. Both my parents were in the service. And I thought I was going to do that through pharmaceuticals. What a joke. But went to community college in Charlotte, North Carolina, and applied to UNC Chapel Hill, did not get in. And then at the urging of one of my counselors, took an internship at the Democratic National Convention in Charlotte in 2011. And fast forward now, it's an honor to be able to see our party, but also just politics in general and culture in general start to embrace different voices, different people. And that's been one of the greatest honors in the work that I have done, is being able to really watch and see that evolve and that change. I think the DNC this year is a great example of that. You had everyone from Little John to Coach Kerr. And so everyone, you could see yourself in different ways, and I hope that continues to grow. But the answer is I truly could never have imagined being in this position, and it's an honor every single day to, what was the word, to serve, to whatever the bars that he had about service. That's
The rent you pay.
the rent you pay, that's right.
Emily, I imagine it would have been hard for you to imagine where you are today, given you have founded a collective. So tell us a little bit about how your thoughts for kind of where you'd be in your career have shaped sort of where you are right now.
Well, growing up, I wanted to be a dancer. So I had worked my entire life to be an Alvin Ailey. I ended up years later working in external comms for Alvin Ailey for almost a decade. So the dream was deferred, but I was still included in that dream. But I injured myself when I was 16 years old, so I ended up having to go to college like everyone else instead of pursuing Broadway or pursuing Alvin Ailey. And then I got exposed to communications. And so the lion's share of my career has been in external communications for companies like Alvin Ailey, Amazon, Google, Macy's. And then when I was in New York in the height of the pandemic, after nearly 20 years there, I wanted a better quality of life. And so I decided, hey, I've had some decent exposure to Washington, D.C. I think this is the time for me. And so I moved here, transitioned here with a company in tech. And I had a desire and a thirst for community. And I did not see people that looked like me that even worked for the company that I worked for. So I started on a very grassroots level, pulling folks together at the time at Amazon. I would meet a brown or underrepresented person from the community, from the company, and get us together just for informal happy hours. That ended up turning into me joining more formally their ERG board, and then understanding, hey, I'd like to do something in service of the broader tech community. I may not always be at this company, but there's always going to be a need for connectivity and community. And so that is in 2022, almost 2 years ago, when I founded the Black Tech Collective, which is an organization that brings Black folks in tech together to commune, gather, and elevate. We also are very strong advocates for representation in the field and for policies that equitably serve us. So, never wanted to be an entrepreneur. It was not in the cards for me, but I can say, I understand what being driven by passion and purpose is.
Good for you. And I'm sure, Pamela, you have kind of had a very impressive career to date. You are especially kind of the tie-in back to so many of the conversations we had earlier this morning around financial access and inclusion and so forth. Tell us a little bit about whether, your big role at KKR is kind of what you imagine, what you envision, and how that sort of veered and changed over the years.
So I grew up in Detroit. Detroit in the house, right? A city that, for a lot of the time when I was growing up, and to some extent still, lived or died by three companies, the automotive companies, right? Mm-hmm. So growing up, I grew up with a real sense of service, but also really got interested in economic development and the role that companies have in the communities in which they live. Because if those companies weren't doing well in supporting the community suffered. So I have always followed what I've been interested in, and took a little bit of a risk taking a job early on in corporate finance to kind of learn how businesses run. If you had asked me coming out of grad school, I had interned with the mayor of the city of New York and was going to have a career in government affairs, which I did later have. But as my career evolved and I started figuring out how do I really want to be of service to communities, I went to the corporate side, which a lot of I got a degree in public policy, a master's. They said, what are you doing going corporate? You sold out, you're going to the dark side, right? What I realized throughout my career is that if you don't have the right people sitting in those corporate seats, the money doesn't end up in the right place, or it doesn't end up being spent at all. So I've really spent my career kind of figuring out how can I, through corporate philanthropy, corporate community engagement, help companies do the right thing, right? Where I am now is a major investment firm. KKR has something like $600 billion in assets under management. And some of the things we're doing, especially as it relates to, for example, employee ownership, which is something that we've created, especially since like 2011. Typically when you have a company and we're working with them when we purchase them, and not just us, but just in general, when the transaction at the end happens, it's a lot of senior managers who receive quite a bit of money. What we've started doing is a concept called employee ownership, where we go in and everyone in the company at all levels, non-senior management, gets a piece of the company, right? So when we exit, we had one that I love the story, CHI, it's a garage door company. Everybody shared in that profit when we exited. And for example, truck drivers got something like $200,000 on the ones who had been there just a short while, ones who had been there and had longer tenure got multiples of that, right? So part of the reason I came to KKR was for the sense of community, but also because we're talking significant ways that we can help people, not just with income, but build wealth. That's a different mindset, income versus wealth, creating assets and things like that that will work for you when you're not in the room is how you build wealth. So it's just kind of been an evolution of how can I, through corporate America, work in a way that helps people in the most positive way, most impactful way.
It's a very good transition to kind of, let's talk about present day and the worlds and institutions that you operate within. And Emily, I want to start with you here. You're all chartering new, different paths for yourselves, even if you're in a role that obviously you had predecessors before you. You're still kind of doing it in your way, with your vision, with your ideals, and with your thoughts. I'm curious, and like I said, Emily, I'm going to start with you. What motivates you day in, day out? You're building this new collective, you know, likely up against a lot of external forces. What is sort of your get out of the bed factor? What's motivating you day in, day out?
I'm really motivated by the big and the small. It can be just last 2 weeks ago when we held a National Black Business Month marketplace where we brought in 15 different vendors and a networking link for our community, and getting a LinkedIn message the next morning that said, hey, that event, this is the second Black Tech Collective event that I've attended, and it's the best room that I've ever been in as an early career professional, someone who's interested in tech. So it's that small impact and then rippling into even larger impact when you think about this Tech Talk Salon series that we have in partnership with HQ, where every quarter we're bringing in the brightest minds in technology to talk to our community. And just for Artificial Intelligence Appreciation Day, we brought in a responsible AI expert who, by being in that room and being able to impart that knowledge into the audience, I know that there's builders in the room who will take that knowledge and put it into the Googles and the Amazons of the world, and it will be in some way a better place. So the large and the small is what inspires me.
Krista, what about you?
It depends on the day, but the third line for me is definitely the next generation, young people. Reaching young people, creating opportunity for young people, and thinking about now in this moment how we know a lot of people who are growing up are having a hard time, whether they're dealing with the lack of opportunity, depression. You know, we've seen it last week in Georgia. There's just a disconnect that's happening in this country but around the world. And I think everyone can agree that there's a lot more work that we have to do there. It's a conversation that I don't think is really being had. And so, young people.
Pamela, what would you add to that?
From my perspective, there was a study that came out a few years ago that if you're born in the bottom 20% economically in this country, you have a 4% chance of making it to the top 20%, regardless of race, anything like that. That number to me is completely unacceptable. So when I think about what I'm doing in my life and my vision, it's about changing the 4, really, because unless there's some type of intervention, unless there's some type of action that takes place, sometimes it's mental health, sometimes it's other issues, sometimes it's capacity building, right? Like you were talking about. It's about changing the 4.
It's clear, very clear. And Vincent, what about you?
I'm usually woken up in the morning out of my bed by a member of Congress. I have 60 in my caucus, and every issue every morning is important. I think for me, much like what Pam is saying, we're really driven right now about opportunity and what that can mean. I was speaking with John Hope Bryant this morning about the way AI will really have the effect it will have. The majority of the country will be people of color in a decade from now. The challenge is that the folks who will now be the majority in the country may not have the skills to compete in this new world of AI because, frankly, most of us don't know what we don't know. So that's a challenge. And for us, you know, at the CBC particularly, these past 10 months, y'all may have seen, we released a big report to kick off CBC Week around diversity, equity, inclusion. I am deeply worried, not only this November, but beyond just this November, about the tools of economic opportunity that are being taken away. Folks cannot get good laws passed in this country, so they are trying to get bad laws passed by federal courts, and they are having an effect. And it is making it more difficult for people to rise. No matter, especially in this town, whether you're Democrat or Republican, no matter where you stand, everybody agrees that we should lift everyone up. I've not heard the leading presidential candidates on either side say that they don't want people to succeed. Everybody says we want people to have more money in their pocket, we want wages, and to Pam's point, we want to close the racial wealth gap in this country. So I'm hopeful that that is where we can come together, because I think that is among the most pressing issues. And also the issue about financial literacy. I'm convinced, particularly after the exercise we went through this last 10 months, that the issue of financial literacy is one of the civil rights issues of our generation. If we don't get people financially literate, then we're going to have a big problem.
So one of the things we love doing at Punchbowl News is getting individuals together across sectors. And I think this stage is very representative of that. We've got public sector. Crystal and I were talking about how we would actually kind of classify her sector. We've just decided it's sort of at the intersection of every sector. We've obviously got tech, we have financial services, and just corporate citizenship overall. And so I'd love for this audience kind of to hear from each of you on what you all see as kind of the greatest kind of growth opportunity when it comes to your industry or your sector. And I think in terms of today's day and kind of the conversations we heard earlier today with Representative Meeks and beyond, what does it really look like for you when you think about the issues your sector or industry faces on issues of access or economic prosperity? And I'd like to actually, I'm going to start with you, Pamela, if you don't mind.
Oh, that's the easy one for me. I touched on it a bit. I mean, when we talk about our shared ownership model, it's about bringing everybody participating in the success of the business. That's huge. Since we started it, billions of dollars have gone to non-senior member employees of these companies. 100,000, I think, or so people have been impacted. In our space, that's groundbreaking because it's changing the equation, right? And then once you do that, for example, when we have an exit, we do financial literacy, because the last thing you want to do is hand someone a check for $500,000 without them having really thought through, how can I use this to create wealth and to create more stability for my family. So to me, I'm kind of repeating what I said, but for me in our industry, in private equity and investments, that's a game changer. That's really a huge game changer.
Emily, what about you? You obviously created an organization off of a lot of issues you had seen. Where do you still feel like is greatest opportunity for economic access and prosperity in the overall tech world?
For me, it's bridging the digital divide, because you can't even get to the starting line for a race if you, regardless of background, socioeconomic status, if you don't have access to the tools of technology and really, the internet, right? As simple as something as simple as the internet to be able to participate, to be an active participant. So it's about accessibility for the disabled community, and then also infrastructure so that those in rural communities can have access to technology, and everyone can, kind of try to work towards building that gap in parity by lowering the barriers against the digital divide, or that further the digital divide that we're trying to break down.
Vincent, I'll go to you now. What, in terms of, as you look across the public sector and kind of beyond, where do you see sort of still greatest area of opportunity where there needs to be greater investment made if you had to kind of prioritize resources and accessibility?
Yeah, it's probably, again, back to the economic prosperity. I think it's where we can get bipartisanship. Obviously, we have an election coming. Once we get on the other side of that, we'll see what the makeup of Washington looks like next year. There are challenges, no doubt. There are folks who agree. There are folks who disagree. That's not new to this town. But I think that these issues around, again, economy, economics. We're hearing what the vice president is saying about the economic opportunity. I think these are the issues that are motivating people. We've done 4 polls in 7 months. Every poll we get back says that housing affordability is the #1 issue that people care about. Today in America, the average wealth of a white family is $220,000. The average wealth of a black family is $40,000. Today in America, 40 years past the Fair Housing Act, we have only moved 3 percentage points in the terms of black people that own a home today. That is unacceptable. That's not just, that's people of color, frankly. So we've got a lot of work to do. I think it's all around the economy, frankly. There are other challenges. Voting rights, criminal justice, those are our North Stars, but this is where I think our bread and butter is, literally.
And Crystal, what about you? You arguably work for one of the largest, microphones, platforms that there is to date. Where do you kind of see yourself and the office spending times in terms of issues of access and economic prosperity?
Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, and for intersection, for us, of course, we're in politics. My bosses, we're not. But, of course, we will always be in politics. We have a production company, Higher Ground, that's working with Netflix and Audible and Spotify, creating content. Today we rolled out the Stevie Wonder podcast if folks want to take a listen in Audible. But we also have the foundation that's doing the nonprofit work, particularly in Girls Opportunity Alliance for Mrs. Obama, working to expand education across the globe and now domestically in Chicago. And so when I think about just the prior question about, what we think about, what I think about, and young people, it just draws me to education and how there's so much work that needs to be done in this country to get education up to par to ensure that young people in general, are learning how to be whole humans and learning how to better serve or to be financially literate, learning how to do things like their taxes, learning how to be able to have the tools to be able to get through hard times. I think there's a deficit when it comes to education. There's a deficit in the conversation when it comes to education. And if we're thinking about creating a generation that's better than where we are right now, and if we're thinking ahead, not just in this moment, the best way, in my opinion, to be able to create a society of whole people, of accepting people, is to work on our education system.
Thank you. We are quickly running out of time here, so we're going to do a Punchbowl News favorite, which is a rapid-fire question round to close us out. So I've got 3 questions. We'll just kind of go down the line. Vincent, we'll start with you each time.
Start down there.
We'll start with you. So my first one, and this one's very appropriate for the executive director, is what is one word you would use to describe CBCF this year?
Frenetic.
Oh, he thought about that. Lit. I'm not gonna lie. I was out till like 2 a.m. You can hear all in my voice. But we're partying for a purpose, right? Like we're connecting, we're fellowshipping, all the things. But it's an awesome opportunity for everyone to get together.
I will say momentous.
Energized. I think energized.
Great words. Second question. We talked a lot about kind of obviously issues, problems, efforts on this stage. But if you could put basically all of your time, energy, resource, if life was created like that, towards solving the solution of one problem as it relates to access and opportunity, what is that solution you would dedicate more time to?
Separate and apart from what I've already said, for me personally, voting rights. I think it's the right from which all other rights flow. I think we got to get very clear about our values in this country. And so for me, it's personally voting rights.
You guys know I'm gonna say education system for sure.
Consistent.
For me, it's representation. Because truly, if you can see it, then you know that you can be it. So I'm, through the Black Tech Collective, trying to create spaces, curate spaces where the future generation of tech titans see it. And so that they know that they can embody it.
I would agree. You can't be what you can't see, right? We have a program for first-generation students. We brought them all in from one university. I said, you're going to spend a day with us at KKR. And someone said, they were from New York. They said, am I going to get to go in that building? And I said, well, of course, that's where the meeting is. He lived in New York. He said, I've walked around that building. I've never been inside it. How's he supposed to be? And this is someone who's studying finance, right? Can't be what you can't see.
Lastly, in the spirit of our ambassador program, would love for each of you to go down the line and share someone that you think should be recognized in their field, somebody who deserves kind of recognition on this stage right now. Vincent, we'll start with
I
you.
have to go first for every one of these.
Thank you. I set you up for that. Sorry.
The only man.
Someone who should be recognized in our field, that is very tough. And I have 60 bosses, so I want to be very careful here. What I will say, I am very much right now inspired by a generation of young people. My younger sister, my parents had another child when I went out to college, and Tiffany started college 3 weeks ago. She is as tuned in as I've ever seen young people. I am truly hopeful for the ability for them to lead. So that's generic, I know, but genuinely, young people, I'm just excited for them and them taking over and leading.
My mama, yeah. This is my mom. I love her. She's my mom in chief. When I look and think about my trajectory, she's been my role model throughout, so.
Ernest Holmes, who is a young man, Morehouse man, who founded an organization, nonprofit called Code House. And this is an organization that is really fortifying the pipeline of technical talent. So he's reaching out to underrepresented folks in college and giving them almost direct pipeline into big tech companies. And so I want to salute him.
I'm going to go with 3. I agree with you. I think someone who is being very assertive and standing up for issues that people are afraid to talk about right now. And then Brandy.
I'll second that. Second that. That was a great way to end. Thank you to the 4 of you for joining us on stage. Thank you to all of our ambassadors in the room. We really appreciate it. We're glad to have you as part of our community, and we recognize and honor every single one of you. In a few moments, we'll be celebrating and sharing in a final toast to the CBC and to our ambassador community. So stay tuned. We'll be back in a few minutes. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rachel.